Happy today everyone, and welcome back to Kibbutz. For those of you coming back, I'm sure it probably looks a little bit different in here. I just tried to change up the lighting a little bit to make it look like I have the slightest clue of what it is I'm doing on this channel. But in all reality, I don't really have any idea what I'm doing, but we'll just see how it goes. If you guys like it, if you don't, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Today we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into hydroponics. I had mentioned it in my intro video and the explanation of that video. I kind of wanted to dive a little bit more into what it is exactly and how actually easy it is. Today I'm going to show you guys a setup that's roughly about 20 bucks to put together for yourselves so you can start growing hydroponically things at home. So now we're going to jump over to my garden. And now, not only is it a hydroponic garden, but it's a magic garden too that comes whenever I snap my fingers, like, wow. So anyway, this is my hydroponic garden bucket. It's nothing too complicated. I just have 5 different herbs that I'm trying to grow in here. So far it's going pretty well. I haven't had really any issues. If anything, some of these plants are just growing too big, which is definitely not a bad problem to have for a garden. So I'll be able to show you guys what I need to do to take care of these things, which is really nothing at all. It's honestly so much easier than having any even potted plant in your windowsill. I basically could not look at these for a month or so and they would still be growing. But enough of me rambling, let's go ahead and jump in and see what's actually going on here. So like I said, we have 5 different varieties of plants that are growing in here, and they're all just herbs. There's nothing too special with them. There's no specific hydroponic plants that you need to grow. Basically anything that has roots you can grow hydroponically. That may be slightly hyperbolic. I don't know if every single plant can be grown this way, but quite a few can. So to start out, I think I'll go over the tiniest one so far, which I'm honestly not too sure what it is. I'm pretty sure it's catnip, but I've never grown it hydroponically before, so I can't guarantee that. I guess I'll have to throw it in my cat's face and see if it is. But anyway, we'll take a look on the inside here. You can see the leaves. So it's still pretty tiny. It's a very slow grower for sure, which is not the greatest, because as these plants in the back here are getting bigger and bigger, the root system's sucking in more and more water. And if this guy doesn't catch up and his roots start getting into the water, it's all going to be gone and he might dry up and die. So this might take some extra care. And then right next to that, we just have some simple parsley. I've grown this once before when I had a hydroponic closet. So the hydroponic closet was a 2-foot by 2-foot closet that I did a setup pretty similar to this inside of, and was able to grow roughly 15 different varieties of plants. And they were all super healthy, super delicious. I had spinach, kale, a ton of different herbs. I had some banana peppers growing in there. I had some tomatoes growing in there. Bunch of different lettuces, basically everything. Oh, and I even had a date palm that started to grow, but I think I forgot to water it or give it some extra water when it ran out and it died, so unfortunate reality of gardening, but oh well. Anyway, this is parsley here. It's also not a very fast grower. As you can see here, there's just a few fronds, or whatever you call them, that have come up. There's another one that's coming up now. But in general, it's growing pretty slow, and again, you can see it doesn't have any roots on the bottom of its cup either. So hopefully those two start catching up, because these are going to start to take over pretty soon here. Continuing to move around, we have some sage right here, which as you can see is growing very well, if anything a bit too well. It's getting a little big, and the only problem I really see is that it's starting to get a little bit leggy. Like you can see, there's kind of a large distance between these different leaf sets up here, so I'm actually going to be pruning these today, because when it comes to herbs, if they start getting too tall, once you snip them off, the lower branches start bushing out a little bit more, so it makes it more squat and fat as opposed to tall and skinny. And now if we just rotate the garden around, so right next to the sage we have some thyme that's growing, and you can see it's doing pretty well. It's also getting just a tad bit leggy, but in all reality, it's not terrible, especially for the low amount of light that I have in the closet right now. But this is my first time growing it hydroponically, and so far it seems to be doing pretty good with very minimal effort. And after my last video where I upped the dosage of the nutrient in the solution, it seems to be doing a lot better, growing a lot faster, a lot healthier, so I'm really happy to see that. And last, but certainly not least, we have basil, which is pretty much my favorite spice, well, technically herb on the planet. It smells great, it tastes great, it grows fast, it's amazing for hydroponics. And you can see it's growing very strongly right now. Of course, it's getting a little bit too big and growing too fast for itself, so I'm gonna have to cut its top off as well to hopefully make them bush out a little bit further. So yeah, now time to show you guys the amount of maintenance this thing takes. And that's it. That is the most work, other than boosting the nutrients at the beginning, that I've had to do to these things. They've grown literally on their own outside of that. Which, to me, I think is a lot better way of gardening than the standard in-soil method. But for those of you not too familiar with gardening, you might think I just committed sacrilege cutting these things basically in half, if not more. But the way that plants work is they have these chemicals known as this that are traveling up to the top, that are causing the top leaves to keep growing and the stem to keep growing upwards. But if you cut that off, those nutrients stop right here, and the next outlet that they can get to are these right here. So it starts growing out this way. And this branch here and this branch here will start getting bigger, as opposed to the stem still growing up. But not only that, they have these chemicals going back down that signal root development, because as the plant gets taller, the roots also need to get larger to supply more nutrients and to supply more support to the plant as it's growing. Anyway, all that to say is that these plants are totally fine. They're gonna just bush out a little bit more, and it'll keep them from getting incredibly tall, and it'll also give us more points to harvest from, which is another good thing. So after a $20 initial investment along with a pair of scissors, if you wait long enough, you can have basically about $6 worth of basil every couple of weeks or so. And the same goes for all these plants. The amount that you pay for these in the supermarket is ridiculous, and the fact that you can grow them this easily in a closet, it's definitely a lot better way to go, I think. So another thing you can do with these herbs once you cut their tops off, instead of just using all the leaves and then throwing the stem away or composting it or whatever you want to do, you can strip a ton of the leaves off, leaving probably these only top two here, and then put it in a cup of water, and after a couple of weeks it's going to start to grow new roots, because like I said, those chemicals that come down from the top, if it's cut off, they're going to signal root growth at the lowest point. So this will start to have shoots that'll come out of it, and that'll actually start to make this a new plant, which is genetically identical to the parent plant. And then you can keep this going and going and going, and essentially have 100 of the exact same genetically identical plant. So the components of a system like this are pretty simple. All you need is a 5-gallon bucket, preferably a food-grade plastic bucket. But if you can't find a food-grade plastic bucket, then whatever you find should work just fine. Once you have your bucket, as you can see, you're going to need to drill some holes out of the top, so you're going to need a hole saw. So now you have a bucket with some holes in it, and now you need to fill those holes. In the top here, we have these net cups, which you can find on Amazon in tons of different sizes. These here are just 2 inches. For doing small herbs and stuff like that, that's totally fine. If you end up doing a lot bigger plants, you can get 3-inch, 4-inch, basically whatever you want. But the other advantage with only having 2-inch cups is you can fit more in here and still have a relatively stable top. Then on the inside of the net cups, we have what's known as rock wool, which is a type of spun rock insulation that works really great for hydroponics because it's a pH neutral medium that has no nutrients whatsoever in it, which is really great for growing stuff basically just hanging in water. So we covered the reservoir, we got the net cups in, we've got a rock wool in, but now obviously you're going to need some seeds, and this is totally up to you in terms of what you want to plant. I would suggest probably staying away from root crops, because since these are net cups, they do have a bottom to them, and you don't want a radish or a carrot to start to bulge out in there and break it. But now that you have all that set up and you have everything ready to go, the main component that you're going to need is your water solution. So let me move this out of the way and show you what we have for that. So when it comes to specifics for Hydroponic Solution, there really isn't anything. People have tested everything from Miracle-Gro to just straight chemicals that they mix together to specific hydroponic solutions you can buy just straight off the shelf. And honestly, they all pretty much work really great as long as you know how to use them. There will be slight variances in how fast your plants grow, how big they get, how much fruit they produce, but in general, they're all pretty good. So I'm just going to show you what I chose here, which is not a recipe, I came up with my own, but I found this from another YouTube channel, which will be linked down in the description. But it is a pretty easy mixture. It's a 2-part solution. made of just simple chemicals and some water. So for our part A solution, you'll see we have 1 gallon of water mixed with 600 grams of what's known as Master Blend 4-1838. When you're looking at fertilizers, both for hydroponics and for growing out of the soil, they'll have somewhere on the front of the package these 3 numbers. And what those are the amount of nutrients that are in there. In the same way that our body has the macronutrient requirements of fat, carbs, and protein, plants have it for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And that's the order that the numbers are appearing in. So the 4 on this one is for the nitrogen. There's 4 parts nitrogen, and there's 18 parts phosphorus and 38 parts potassium. Now, it would take a long time for me to dive into the way nerdy side of what exactly all these nutrients do for the plants. But of these 3, the main 2 that you need to think about are the nitrogen and the potassium. Usually people consider the nitrogen to be what helps promote green leafy growth and plant growth in general. And the potassium is what's known to produce flowers and to help with fruiting. So oftentimes, depending on what you're growing, you'll need to adjust those values to assist in what they're trying to do. For instance, your herbs and lettuces will only really need green leafy growth, so you want to have higher nitrogen in those. But if you're growing like peppers, tomatoes, and stuff like that, you're going to want to have higher potassium for sure. But then after that, we have just 300 grams of Epsom salt. And there's nothing special about this. It's pretty much just the Epsom salt you find at Walmart or wherever you go shopping. And the last ingredient is 1.5 grams of sodium benzoate, which is basically just a preservative to make sure this stuff stays as it is. So that's all for part A of this. And when we switch over to part B, it's even simpler. It's just a gallon of water, and then we got 900 grams of calcium nitrate. Now, the reason that there's a part A and part B, I don't exactly remember since I made this 4 years ago, but I believe the guy who came up with the recipe had said for some reason the calcium nitrate doesn't play well with one of the ingredients in the part A mixture for a long period of time. So I think that's why it's just split up into the 2 parts. So lastly, in terms of what water to use, you honestly can just use straight tap water, which is what I've been doing. However, if you live in the city, usually they treat that water with a little bit of chlorine, so you might want to let that water sit and let the chlorine evaporate for about 24 hours or so. But if you're impatient, you don't really have to do that. I haven't been doing that with mine. I haven't noticed really any issues. But the better option is to use distilled water. Distilled water theoretically has nothing in it, so you're starting with a clean slate and you're only relying on the nutrients that you put into it. You're not worried about what was in there originally. You're not worried about whether there's chlorine or not. You can just start right off with a clean slate and add whatever you want to. Now, in terms of how much that you need to add, that honestly depends. Again, all of these plants require different amounts of nutrients in order to be growing healthily. But if you just go on Google and look up hydroponic needs for different plants, it'll provide many tables that will say the specific values of nutrient that you need to put in for growing each plant. And the way you check how much fertilizer you have in the water that you're going to be growing your plants in is through using a TDS meter, or total dissolved solids. There's a couple of other different types of meters you can get, but honestly TDS is just a good, easy, cheap way to get started in this. And once you have one of those and you have your solution and you have your water, you'll just want to add the solution to the water until you get to the value for the plant you're going to try and grow in the top. Now, as I showed you, I have 5 different plants growing in one bucket, which is honestly not the greatest idea. As I was mentioning, they grow at different rates. In addition to the fact that some plants require more nutrients, some plants require less, so you might end up burning something that requires less, or starving something that requires more. So ideally, if you're just starting out, just use 1 plant per bucket that you start out with. And lastly, when it comes to light, as I said, I'm growing in a closet right now, which closets aren't really known for being bright, well-lit areas of the house. So what I did was I just ran an extension cable from the outlet outside the closet to a lamp that's on the inside. And it's just a $7 shop light I found at Walmart with an LED bulb on the inside, so it saves a little bit of energy in the long run. But as you know, plants don't get 24 hours of sunshine, so you can't just have the light going the whole day. And if you're lazy like me, just get yourself a cheap little outlet timer, and then you can set anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a day for your plants to get light. So to get the seeds started, you're not going to want to grow them directly in the rock wool hanging above the water. You can do that, but usually what's better to start off with is a little miniature greenhouse, like those clear plastic egg cartons. You take the seeds, put them in the rock wool, and then soak them all the way through. fill it up with a little extra water in the crate, close it, and then sit it in direct sunlight and just let it grow like that until the plants start shooting up and start reaching the roof of their little greenhouse. And then you can transplant them into the bucket and then grow them from there. And that's basically it. You're ready to start growing.